My name is Madeline Carter. I am 30 years old, and for most of my life, I thought family was supposed to be a safe place. I worked hard, I tried to please my parents, but somehow I was always the daughter who never measured up. That Christmas Eve in Boulder, surrounded by glittering lights, and the smell of pine, I expected at least a moment of peace. Instead, in front of the entire family, my parents looked at me with cold eyes and said I had been cut out of Grandpa's will because I was ungrateful. My heart stopped, the room fell silent, and every pair of eyes turned on me. What none of them knew was that Grandpa had left behind a truth they could not escape. And once it came to light, nothing in our family would ever be the same. Let me take you back to where it began. It was Christmas Eve of 2022, the kind of night that should have felt magical, with snow drifting softly outside and the smell of pine needles filling the grand old house in Boulder. My family's estate had always been decorated to the nines, with wreaths on every window and a tree that touched the ceiling in the main hall. But to me, the whole place felt cold. I stepped inside wearing the same navy dress I had worn for 3 Christmases in a row, clutching the small gift I had bought for my father with my own modest paycheck. No one looked up to greet me. The chatter around the long dining table hushed for only a moment as I walked in. My sister Claire, with her designer red dress and perfect hair, smirked before turning back to her glass of champagne. My younger brother Eric glanced at me and whispered something that made him laugh into his drink. I took a seat at the far end, far from the golden glow of approval my parents gave to the two of them. Dinner moved along with the clinking of silverware and shallow small talk. I sat in silence, pushing potatoes around my plate when my father cleared his throat. His voice carried down the table, deep and sharp. "Madeline, we should talk openly tonight." His eyes were fixed on me with that same disapproval I had known all my life. My mother set her fork down gently, almost rehearsed, and added with a tone that was too calm to be kind. "Your father and I have already settled the matter of your grandfather's estate." My stomach clenched. I glanced at the faces around the table. Even cousins who barely knew me leaned forward, curious. I asked softly, "What do you mean?" My father leaned back, folded his arms, and said, "We divided his property and accounts. You are not included." My mother's voice followed, cool and unshaken. "You were left out because you are ungrateful." The words struck me harder than I expected, even after years of being belittled. Ungrateful. That label had haunted me since childhood, but to hear it thrown at me on Christmas Eve, in front of every relative gathered, was like being shoved into icy water. I felt the blood drain from my face as whispers rippled across the table. Claire let out a faint laugh, pretending to cough into her napkin. Eric leaned back in his chair with a grin, shaking his head. I gripped my hands together under the table, fighting to keep my composure. The room blurred for a moment as I searched the faces around me for any sign of support. None came. I pushed back my chair, the sound screeching against the hardwood floor. My voice trembled, but I forced it out. "So this is it. This is what you think of me." My father's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. My mother just looked down at her plate as if she had already dismissed me. I could not breathe in that room. I turned and walked out through the side door, past the towering tree, glittering with ornaments collected through generations. The cold air slapped my face as I stepped onto the stone patio. Snowflakes clung to my hair. I leaned against the railing, pressing my palms flat against the frozen wood, trying to steady my breath. Inside, laughter picked up again, muffled by the walls. They had gone back to their wine and their stories, as if erasing me from my grandfather's legacy was just another piece of business. My chest ached with humiliation. Every part of me wanted to scream, to demand they see me, to remind them that I had been by Grandpa's side when no one else bothered. But my voice had already been taken from me in that dining room. I stared out at the dark garden, the branches sagging with snow, and wondered how long I could keep standing on the edge of this family without falling off completely. The night was supposed to be about love and togetherness, yet I had never felt more alone. I drew in a shaky breath, pulling my coat tighter around me. Something inside me whispered that this moment, as cruel as it was, would not be the end of the story. It felt more like the beginning of a storm I had no choice but to walk straight into. And as the bells from the church downtown faintly rang midnight, I realized that Christmas would never be the same for me again. I thought back to when I was 9 years old, sitting on the back porch of our house in Boulder, while my parents praised Claire for winning her first spelling bee. She wore a bright blue ribbon pinned to her dress, grinning from ear to ear, as they told her how proud they were. Eric, though younger than me, was already treated like the family star, babied and spoiled. My father pulled him onto his lap, laughing at every small thing he said. I sat quietly in the corner, clutching a book I had borrowed from the library, waiting for someone to notice me. Nobody did. That night, after the celebration faded, my father stopped in the hallway when he saw me reading. His words cut sharp like they always did. You never show gratitude for what we do. All you do is read and dream. You are ungrateful, Madeline. My mother nodded in agreement, her lips tight, as if my very presence embarrassed her. I swallowed hard, not understanding how choosing to love books and ideas instead of trophies and ribbons made me less of their child. The word ungrateful stuck. It became a label I could not peel off. At every milestone it returned. When Claire was accepted into a private summer program for business leadership, my parents threw a party. When I said I wanted to spend my summer volunteering at a food bank, my father shook his head, repeating the same line. You just want to avoid real work. You are ungrateful for the opportunities we have given you. Years later, when I was 17 and preparing for college, the pattern continued. My father pressed a glossy brochure into my hands from his construction company. He wanted me to study business, join him in running the firm one day. He said it was time I finally gave something back to the family. But I had already been accepted at the University of Colorado Boulder to study sociology, determined to understand the struggles of people who were ignored, like I often felt ignored at home. The argument that night burned into my memory. My father's voice was sharp, echoing in the kitchen. Do you think you are better than us? Do you think helping strangers is more important than building the company that feeds you? I stood my ground for the first time, my voice shaking but clear. I do not want your company. I want a life that feels honest. My mother's face turned cold, her disappointment heavy. She whispered the same word that had followed me since childhood. Ungrateful. It was my grandfather, Richard Carter, who found me crying in the backyard after that fight. He placed a gentle hand on my shoulder and sat with me under the old oak tree. His voice was calm, steady, like the earth itself. Do not let them convince you that gratitude means obedience. Gratitude is in how you treat people, not in how closely you follow a path someone else lays out. I remember looking up at him, the moonlight on his weathered face, and feeling for the first time that someone truly saw me. Grandpa had lived through enough to understand. He had built the family fortune through years of hard labor, running a small lumberyard that eventually grew into land holdings and investments. He valued resilience, honesty, and kindness more than titles or money. When I told him about my major, his eyes lit up. The world needs people like you, Maddie. Never let anyone tell you different. His words became my anchor. Still, at every family gathering, I was reminded of how little value my parents placed on me. Claire excelled in her marketing degree, winning awards and internships. Eric went into finance, his sharp suits and arrogant smile making him my father's pride. And I, the daughter who chose a nonprofit career, was still the ungrateful one. One Thanksgiving in my early 20s stands out vividly. The table was full, the turkey carved, the wine flowing. My uncle asked everyone about their plans. When it was my turn, I explained that I had an internship with a youth outreach program downtown, helping kids who had no stable home. The table fell silent, then laughter bubbled around me. Claire snickered, saying how sweet that was. Eric rolled his eyes. My father leaned in and said loudly enough for the entire room to hear. So our daughter has chosen poverty on purpose. My cheeks burned. I wanted the floor to open and swallow me. Once again, it was Grandpa who rescued me. He tapped his glass, the laughter fading. Let me tell you something. I started with nothing, just a tiny lumber yard and a dream. People thought I was foolish. They called me naive. But what matters is not what they say. It is whether you can look at yourself in the mirror and know you lived your truth. He glanced at me then, eyes kind. Maddie, I am proud of you. That night I cried quietly in my room, holding on to his words. They were a lifeline in a house that so often made me feel like I was drowning. As the years went by, the distance between me and my parents only grew. Every decision I made seemed to confirm their judgment. When I moved into a modest apartment in Denver, instead of staying close in Boulder, they said I was abandoning the family. When I worked late nights writing grant proposals instead of joining them at country club dinners, they said I was disrespectful. Ungrateful. Always ungrateful. Yet Grandpa continued to invite me for tea in his study, surrounded by shelves of old books and photographs of his early days. He would ask about my work, listen intently, and remind me that making a difference in even one life mattered more than chasing status. He would say, "Your parents do not understand because they see gratitude as control, but I see gratitude in the way you give your time and heart to others." Remembering those moments as I stood on the cold patio that Christmas night, I realized how much of my strength came from him. He had been the only voice that ever countered the chorus calling me ungrateful. And now he was gone, leaving behind a silence. My parents filled with cruelty. I stayed outside until the cold bit through my coat and my fingers stiffened. Inside, the lights glowed warm, the sound of clinking glasses and shallow laughter carrying faintly through the walls. I knew I had no place at that table anymore. Maybe I never had. But I also knew something else, something my grandfather had planted deep in me years ago. Ungrateful was their word, not mine, and I would not carry it forever. My days in Denver were filled with work that kept me moving, sometimes from sunrise until long after dark. As program manager for a nonprofit that served homeless teenagers, I balanced budgets that never stretched far enough. Coordinated volunteers who showed up late or not at all, and listened to stories from kids who had endured more pain in 15 years than many adults face in a lifetime. It was exhausting, but it gave me purpose. When I walked into our small downtown center, the smell of coffee brewing and the sound of laughter in the common room reminded me why I had chosen this path. To my family, though, it was nothing. In their eyes, I had chosen scraps instead of silver. They measured success in square footage and last names printed on plaques at the country club. They never asked how many kids I had helped place into safe housing, or how many college applications I had, stayed up late editing with a young girl who wanted to be the first in her family to attend school beyond high school. One Friday evening, just a week before Christmas, we held a small holiday gathering for the teens and their families. Our center could not afford lavish decorations, so we strung paper snowflakes across the walls and used a donated tree with mismatched ornaments. I remember watching the kids pile plates with turkey and mashed potatoes donated by a local grocery chain, their faces lighting up like they were at a banquet. My coworker Jessica nudged me, whispering that I looked happier than she had seen me in months. I smiled because in that room I felt richer than my parents would ever admit. The next day, against my better judgment, I joined a family dinner at my parents' house in Boulder. They had insisted it was a simple gathering, nothing formal, but I knew better. Walking into their living room, I was met with the usual display of wealth. A massive wreath hung above the fireplace, gifts stacked under a second tree, and crystal glasses already filled with wine. Claire sat comfortably on the sofa, scrolling through her phone with a designer clutch perched next to her. Eric lounged in a leather chair wearing a new suit that screamed money even before he opened his mouth. I greeted them quietly, trying not to invite trouble, but trouble always found me. As dinner began, Claire leaned forward, eyes glittering with mischief. "So, Maddie, how is the charity work?" Still handing out sandwiches under bridges, Eric snorted, nearly choking on his drink. My father chuckled and said in his booming voice, "She still believes saving the world is more important than building one." The table erupted in laughter. Heat rushed to my face. I set down my fork carefully, afraid that if I spoke too quickly, my anger would explode. I forced my voice to stay calm. I manage programs that help teenagers find shelter and education. It is more than handing out sandwiches. My mother sighed heavily, her expression rehearsed disappointment. Claire raised an eyebrow. That is sweet, Maddie, but do you actually make a living? Or are you just surviving on scraps? Their words sliced into me sharper than any knife. I looked at the faces of the people who should have been my foundation and realized they would never see value in what I did. They had decided long ago that because I chose a different path, I was unworthy. Something inside me shifted. I had endured their comments for years, sitting quietly letting the shame settle into my bones. Not this time. I lifted my head, met my father's stare, and spoke firmly. I am not a failure because I do not chase the same things you do. My work matters. It may not impress the country club, but it saves lives. The laughter died. Forks paused midair. Claire's smile faltered. Eric stopped chewing, and even my father looked momentarily stunned. My mother shook her head slowly, as though I had just confirmed her worst fears. The silence stretched until my father leaned back in his chair, his jaw tight. You are stubborn, he muttered, but it does not change the truth. I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears. I excused myself from the table, not wanting to give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. In the hallway, I stood for a moment by the family portraits lining the wall. Pictures of vacations and Aspen graduation ceremonies, and award dinners. In nearly every frame, Claire and Eric stood front and center, smiling with pride. In the few where I appeared, I was tucked to the side, half hidden, as if I were already being erased. Driving back to Denver that night, the road slick with snow, I gripped the steering wheel tightly. The words ungrateful and failure replayed in my mind, but for the first time I did not swallow them whole. Instead, I reminded myself of the faces I had seen at the holiday gathering, at the center of kids who had called me Miss Maddie, with gratitude in their eyes. They saw me, they valued me, and no amount of scorn from my family could strip that away. By the time I reached my apartment, the city lights shimmering against the mountains, I felt a strange calm settle over me. My parents could laugh, Claire could sneer, Eric could mock, but they could not define me anymore. What they did not realize, and what I was only beginning to understand, was that their cruelty was pushing me closer to the truth my grandfather had always seen. And the day would come when that truth would not just comfort me, it would confront them in a way they could not escape. One late afternoon, I drove up the winding road to my grandfather's estate, the sun dropping low behind the mountains and casting long shadows across the snow. The house had always felt enormous to me, even intimidating, but that day I felt a pull toward it, as if I needed to anchor myself in the place where he and I had shared so many quiet conversations. I parked near the garage, the familiar stone structure standing tall against the winter sky. Inside the house, my relatives were gathered in the front parlor sipping wine and chatting in their rehearsed voices. I slipped away my boots, clicking softly on the marble floor as I made my way down the hall toward the garage door. My heart pounded. I had not set foot in that garage in months, not since Grandpa had pulled me aside and told me to pay attention to the old suitcase tucked away in the corner. His voice had been steady, his eyes sharp despite his age. If you ever need answers, Maddie, look for it. The garage smelled of oil and wood shavings, a mix of history and hard work. The light above flickered as I stepped in, brushing my hand along the cold metal of the workbench. My eyes landed on the battered brown suitcase near the back wall, half hidden behind stacks of paint cans. My breath caught. This was it. I crouched down, running my fingers over the worn leather handle. The lock was still intact, a simple brass clasp that looked fragile with age. I tugged lightly, but it did not give. A rush of footsteps startled me. I looked up to see my mother standing in the doorway, arms crossed, her face tight with suspicion. "What are you doing out here, Madeline?" I froze, my hand still resting on the suitcase. "I was just remembering, Grandpa," I managed to say, trying to keep my voice steady. She narrowed her eyes. "This is not the place for you. Go back inside." Reluctantly, I stood and brushed off my hands, forcing a smile that fooled neither of us. I walked past her, feeling her gaze burn into my back, and returned to the house. My heart raced the entire evening, the image of that suitcase flashing in my mind like a beacon I could not ignore. The memory of Grandpa's last clear conversation with me returned full force. It had been just a few weeks before his health began to fail rapidly. We had sat together in the garage, the heater humming softly, his hands folded neatly on his cane. He told me stories of when he was young, how he had built his lumber yard from scratch, how people had called him reckless for dreaming bigger than his circumstances. He looked at me then with eyes that seemed to pierce right through me. "I know they call you ungrateful, Maddie. Do not let that word chain you down. One day the truth will matter more than their judgments." I had nodded, tears in my eyes, unsure what he meant, until he leaned closer and pointed with his cane toward the corner where the suitcase Saturday. "If you ever feel you need to understand, look there." His voice cracked slightly, but his gaze never wavered. "Promise me," I promised. Now, standing in the middle of the living room, surrounded by relatives who cared more about appearances than family, I felt the weight of that promise pressing against my chest. Claire chatted loudly about her latest marketing project, Eric, bragged about a new promotion at the bank, and my parents smiled proudly at their words. I sat silently, my mind not on them, but on the suitcase in the garage and the questions it held. Later that night, after the guests had gone and the house had grown quiet, I stepped outside into the freezing air. The lights along the roofline twinkled against the dark sky, but I barely noticed. My thoughts circled back to Grandpa's words, to the steady way he had said them, to the certainty in his eyes. He had known something. He had left me something. The wind cut across my face, and I pulled my coat tighter, staring back at the garage door, illuminated by the porch light. I could almost feel him standing beside me, reminding me not to lose courage. Whatever was in that suitcase, it was meant for me. I just did not know how I would get to it without the entire family watching. That night, as I drove home, the roads quiet and icy, I carried his words with me. The promise I had made to him weighed heavy, but it also steadied me. For the first time in a long time, I felt that, maybe, just maybe, I was not as alone as my parents wanted me to believe. Grandpa's decline began slowly, with little things that seemed easy to brush off. He would pause halfway up the stairs, gripping the banister longer than usual, or ask me to repeat myself because he had drifted off mid-conversation. At first I told myself it was age, nothing more. But by late summer of 2022, the changes became impossible to ignore. His hands shook when he poured tea in the study, and his once steady stride turned into short, careful steps. I remember the first time I asked directly. We were sitting in his sunroom, the light pouring through tall windows as he stirred honey into his cup. "Grandpa, have you seen a doctor recently?" He waved me off gently, his tone almost playful. "Doctor, Lewis stops by every month. It's just old age catching up with me. Don't you worry, Maddie." But I did worry. I worried every time I drove back to Denver and pictured him alone in that enormous house. My parents, of course, weren't concerned. In fact, they seemed almost eager to take control. By September, my father had announced that he and my mother would be handling all of Grandpa's appointments. I found out because when I tried to visit one afternoon, a new nurse at the door told me visits had to be scheduled through my parents. The daytime nurse, Paul Reynolds, was polite but distant. I showed up one Tuesday, and he stood in the doorway with his clipboard. "I'm sorry, Miss Carter," he said. "Grandpa is resting. He needs his strength." I tried to argue, pointing out that I had always visited on Tuesdays, but he shook his head firmly. "Your parents think he needs less stimulation. I'll have to ask you to leave." I walked back to my car, my chest burning with frustration. Less stimulation. As if my presence exhausted him. I knew it was not true. Whenever we spoke on the phone, his voice grew lighter, stronger even. But the calls became shorter, too, with someone often interrupting in the background. One evening in October, I left work early and drove straight to Boulder, determined to see him. By the time I arrived, the house was quiet, the sun already sinking. The night nurse, Janet Miller, opened the door, her expression softer than Paul's. She glanced around nervously before letting me in. "He asks about you," she whispered. "He misses you." My eyes stung with tears. She led me down the hall to his bedroom, where he lay propped up against pillows. His skin looked pale, his frame thinner, but his eyes lit up when he saw me. Maddie, he rasped, reaching out his hand. I sat beside him, clutching it tightly. We only had 15 minutes before Janet had to finish her report, but in those moments he spoke with a clarity that cut straight through me. They've kept you away, haven't they? I nodded, unable to hide the pain on my face. His voice dropped lower, almost a whisper. Don't let them convince you you're unworthy. You are not ungrateful. You are the only one who understands me. I swallowed hard, blinking back tears. He squeezed my hand with surprising strength. Promise me you'll remember that. I promised. When Janet returned, I kissed his forehead and slipped out quietly, my heart aching with both relief and fear. I had seen him, but I knew it might not happen again soon. The weeks that followed were a constant battle. Every attempt I made to visit during the day was blocked by Paul or by my parents directly. Claire and Eric suddenly became more attentive, posting photos with Grandpa on social media, their captions dripping with sentiment. Family time with the best man we know, nothing about it felt real. They had barely visited him for years, and now they were playing the role of devoted grandchildren. One night in November, I tried calling Grandpa's room. My father answered. He sounded irritated, as though I had interrupted a meeting. Maddie, your grandfather is tired. Don't call so late. It was only 8 in the evening. I bit my tongue and hung up, shaking with anger. The next morning, I drove to the estate again. This time, I caught Janet just as she was leaving after her night shift. She hesitated before speaking, glancing toward the house. He asks for you almost every day, she confided. I don't think he understands why you aren't here. She pressed her lips together, as if debating, then lowered her voice. If you come early before Paul arrives, I can give you a few minutes with him. That sliver of kindness kept me going. The following week, I showed up at dawn, the sky still dark, and Janet let me in. Grandpa was asleep, his breathing shallow but even. I sat in the chair by his bed, watching the rise and fall of his chest, trying to memorize every detail of his face. When his eyes fluttered open, he smiled faintly. Maddie, you're here. I leaned close, whispering that I loved him. His fingers trembled as he reached for mine. His words were slow but certain. They think they know what's best. But I trust you. I wanted to stay forever, but footsteps echoed down the hall. Janet urged me to leave through the back, her eyes full of worry. As I slipped out into the chilly morning air, I felt torn between gratitude and despair. I had seen him again, but each visit felt like it might be the last. By late November, his decline was impossible to ignore. Even my parents admitted he was weaker, though they spoke of it as an inconvenience rather than heartbreak. At Thanksgiving, my father announced at the table that Grandpa needed round-the-clock care. Claire offered to help with arrangements, as though moving him into a facility was a business decision. My mother nodded, adding that it was time to be practical. I could not stay quiet. He wants to be at home, I reminded them, my voice trembling with anger. I've spoken to Dr. Lewis. He agrees it's better for his mental health. My mother shot me a sharp look. And what qualifications do you have, Maddie? Are you a doctor now? The room fell silent, everyone staring at me. I felt my pulse race, my face hot. This isn't about qualifications, I said firmly. It's about listening to what he wants. If you had been here more often, you might know that. The explosion came instantly. My father slammed his glass down, wine spilling across the tablecloth. Claire accused me of trying to control everything. Eric smirked, muttering that I was brainwashing Grandpa. My mother hissed the word ungrateful again, loud enough for everyone to hear. I stood shaking, my hands clenched at my sides. For once, I did not back down. This isn't about me, I said, my voice cutting through the noise. This is about respecting him while he's still here. The table erupted, voices, overlapping accusations flying. But through it all, I held on to the image of Grandpa's eyes, the way they softened when he saw me, the way his voice steadied, when he told me I was the only one who understood. I left the house that night with my ears ringing and my heart pounding. The cold air hit me as I stepped outside, and for the first time, I allowed myself to acknowledge the truth. My family was not just indifferent. They were actively trying to push me out to rewrite the story of who Grandpa trusted. And standing there under the brittle November sky, I realized that every fight from now on would be a fight not just for him, but for myself. December brought with it a bitter chill, the kind that seeps through layers of coats and lingers in your bones. One Sunday morning, my phone rang. As I was leaving the grocery store, the bag of apples in my hand slipping when I saw my mother's name flashing across the screen. Her voice was flat, almost mechanical. "Your grandfather has been moved to the hospital." I dropped the bag right there in the parking lot, apples rolling across the slush. My chest tightened as I asked which hospital, already fumbling with my keys. She answered curtly, said they were on their way, and hung up before I could say another word. The drive to Boulder felt endless, each red light another cruel delay. When I arrived, the sterile smell of disinfectant hit me as I rushed through the sliding doors. The nurses directed me to a private room. I stepped inside to see Grandpa lying in a hospital bed, tubes and monitors surrounding him. His skin looked almost translucent, his breathing shallow. My father stood at the window, arms folded, his back stiff. My mother sat in a chair by the bed, staring at the monitors, as if she could will them to change. Claire dabbed her eyes with a tissue while Eric scrolled on his phone, his expression unreadable. I moved quietly to the bedside and reached for Grandpa's hand. It felt cold, his fingers fragile in mine. For a moment, his eyes fluttered open. He looked at me, recognition sparking, and his lips moved faintly. I leaned close, straining to hear. His words were barely a whisper. "Promise me, Maddie, remember." His eyes closed again, his breathing uneven. I wanted to stay to talk, to pour out everything I had never said, but the machines beeped steadily, a reminder that time was no longer ours to control. That night I was not allowed to stay. My father insisted the hospital had rules, and only immediate guardians could remain. He ushered me out into the hallway, his tone clipped. "Go home, Madeline. We will handle this." I wanted to argue, but the look in his eyes was a wall I could not climb. 3 days later, just as the first heavy snowstorm of the season blanketed the town, my phone buzzed again. This time it was Eric, his voice blunt and cold. "He's gone." The world tilted. I sank onto my couch, staring at the muted television screen, where a holiday movie played, laughter echoing from strangers who had no idea my heart had cracked open. The grief hit like a wave, sharp and merciless. I had not been there at the end. I had not said goodbye. The funeral was a blur of black coats and stiff embraces. Neighbors and business associates filled the church, their condolences sounding more like rehearsed lines than genuine sorrow. My parents stood in front, dignified and controlled, while Claire clung to my mother's arm for effect. Eric shook hands with local officials as if networking. I sat quietly in the second row, clutching a folded program, staring at Grandpa's photo on the front. The picture showed him smiling in his garden sunlight, catching his silver hair. That was the man I knew, not the frail body in the hospital bed. After the service, I lingered by the casket, running my hand lightly over the polished wood. My voice trembled as I whispered, "I'm sorry I wasn't there. I hope you know I love you." The reception back at the estate was suffocating. Guests mingled in the great hall, balancing plates of catered food while murmuring about legacies and business ventures. My parents moved from group to group like hosts at a gala, receiving compliments on the arrangements. I felt like an intruder in my own family. As I stepped out onto the back patio for air, Janet appeared. She had come quietly, standing near the edge of the crowd, her nurse's uniform replaced with a simple black coat. She touched my arm gently. "Your grandfather asked me to give you something." She pressed a small brass key into my palm, cool against my skin. My breath caught. The suitcase. Her eyes held mine for a moment, soft with understanding. "He wanted you to have it." I closed my fingers around the key, my throat tight with gratitude and grief. That night, alone in my apartment, I placed the key on my kitchen table and stared at it for hours. The edges gleamed under the overhead light, so ordinary and yet heavy with meaning. I knew exactly what it unlocked, and I knew I could not ignore it. Still, the weight of his absence pressed down harder than the promise of any secret. I curled up on the couch, clutching the key, and let the tears come. The sound of the wind outside carried through the windows, the storm rattling the glass, as if the world itself was mourning with me. When the storm passed, the sky cleared to reveal a still frozen morning. I held the key tightly in my pocket as I looked out over the city. Grief had carved a hollow in me, but beneath it flickered a spark of something else. Grandpa had left me with more than memories. He had left me with a purpose I had not yet uncovered. And I knew the moment would come when I would finally open that suitcase in the garage, no matter what my family tried to do to stop me. The first chance I had came on a gray morning a week after the funeral. The house was quieter than I had ever known it, though cars still lined the driveway from relatives who seemed more interested in meetings than mourning. I slipped inside through the side door and made my way to the garage. My pulse pounded in my ears as I closed the heavy door behind me, the brass key in my hand slick with sweat. The suitcase sat where I remembered, tucked behind stacks of dusty boxes. I knelt in front of it, slipped the key into the lock, and turned. The click echoed in the stillness, sharp and final. My hands trembled as I lifted the lid. Inside were bundles of envelopes tied neatly with ribbon stacks of old photographs and a leather-bound notebook worn at the edges. On top of everything lay a folded letter with my name, written in Grandpa's unmistakable handwriting. My throat tightened as I opened it. Dearest Maddie, if you are reading this, I am gone. I wanted you to know you were always the one who listened with your heart. Others called you ungrateful, but I saw gratitude in the way you lived. The things in this suitcase will help you understand the choices I made. Use them when the time comes. Tears blurred my vision, but I forced myself to keep reading. He spoke of his regrets, how he had watched the family lose sight of compassion in their pursuit of wealth. He wrote that he trusted me to carry forward what truly mattered. At the end, his words were simple. Do not let them erase you. You are my legacy. I pressed the letter to my chest, the weight of his trust settling deep inside me. Then I turned to the notebook. It was filled with pages of his handwriting dates, carefully recorded details of conversations he had overheard, notes about my parents instructing staff to limit my visits, records of Claire mocking me behind closed doors, even comments from Eric dismissing me as a failure. Each entry was like a wound reopened, yet proof that Grandpa had seen it all. Underneath the notebook were photographs. Some showed me and Grandpa in the garden or sitting in his study with books scattered across the table. Others showed the rest of the family at events where I had been excluded, images I had never seen before. Tucked between the photographs were receipts and copies of emails, evidence that my parents had discussed financial matters while Grandpa was still alive, planning as though his passing was already secured. At the bottom of the suitcase was a smaller envelope sealed with wax. My hands shook as I broke it open. Inside was a notarized statement confirming that Grandpa had undergone 3 separate competency evaluations while drafting his will. Each document certified that he was of sound mind. My breath caught. He had anticipated the fight. He had prepared everything. I sat back on the cold concrete floor, surrounded by the life he had left behind for me to uncover. My eyes stung with tears, but beneath the grief was a steady flame of resolve. For so long I had doubted myself, let their voices drown mine out. Now I had proof not only of their cruelty but of his unwavering belief in me. The sound of footsteps jolted me upright. I shoved the documents back into the suitcase, clutching the letter in my coat pocket. The garage door creaked open, and my father stepped inside, his eyes narrowing when he saw me. What are you doing out here, Maddie? I forced my voice to remain calm, just looking through some of Grandpa's things. He studied me for a moment, suspicion flickering across his face. Be careful, he said finally, his tone flat. Some things are better left alone. I nodded though, my heart raced, and he turned back toward the house. When the door closed, I exhaled, my body shaking with relief. That evening in my apartment, I spread the contents of the suitcase across my table. The letters, the notebook, the documents, all of it painted a picture I had known in my heart but had never been able to prove. My family had worked to shut me out, to silence me. But Grandpa had been watching, documenting, preparing. He had left me more than memories. He had left me the truth. As the city lights glowed outside my window, I touched the worn cover of his notebook and whispered aloud. I promise I won't let them take this from me. I promise I'll make sure your voice is heard. And for the first time since he passed, I felt not just grief, but purpose. The day of the will reading arrived on a crisp October afternoon, the kind of day Grandpa had always loved, with golden leaves scattered across the stone driveway and the mountain air sharp enough to sting your cheeks. I parked my old Honda between my aunt's Mercedes and my father's SUV, the contrast so stark it almost made me laugh. Inside, the great hall was crowded with relatives dressed in somber shades, though their hushed voices carried more curiosity than grief. I walked slowly toward the sitting room, each step echoing against the polished floor. Heads turned as I entered, conversations pausing. Claire's eyes widened before she darted off to whisper something to my mother. My father's voice cut through the silence when he spotted me. "What are you doing here?" "This is a private family meeting." I steadied myself, gripping the strap of my bag. "I am family. Grandpa was my grandfather, too." A cold laugh slipped from my aunt's lips. "You manipulated a sick old man. You have no place here." The sting of her words burned, but I held my ground. I took a seat near the door, ignoring the stares, and waited. My heart pounded every second, stretching longer than the last. Then the door opened, and a tall man in a gray suit walked in, carrying a leather briefcase. His presence silenced the room. Michael Harris introduced himself as the executor of Richard Carter's will. His calm authority filled the space. "Whatever you have discussed among yourselves is irrelevant. This will can only be read by me." My father stiffened in his chair, my mother lowered her gaze, and Claire let out a nervous laugh that quickly faded. The air grew heavy as Michael unfolded a stack of papers. His voice was steady, formal. "This is the last will and testament of Richard Carter, dated April 15th of this year, witnessed by myself and Dr. Lewis Harrington." The mention of the date sent a jolt through me. April. That was after the disastrous birthday dinner, when I had finally stood up to my family. Grandpa had changed his will after that night. Michael cleared his throat. Before specifying the distributions, Miss Carter requested that a personal statement be read in full. My aunt shifted impatiently. "Is that really necessary?" We all knew what he wanted. Michael's gaze hardened. "I am obligated to read every word exactly as written." The room fell silent as he continued. "To my family gathered here, throughout my 85 years, I have come to understand that true wealth is not measured by what we accumulate, but by what we share. Money and possessions mean nothing if they do not serve a greater purpose. I have watched with concern as some of you place status above compassion. I have seen kindness mistaken for weakness. And I have seen one person in this family show consistent love and care without expectation of reward." A lump rose in my throat as Michael read on. "For this reason, I hereby leave the entirety of my estate, including the family home, financial assets, investments, and personal property, to my granddaughter Madeline Grace Carter." The words seemed to hang in the air before the room erupted. My aunt shot to her feet, shouting that it was outrageous. My father's face turned crimson as he demanded the will be contested. Claire covered her mouth with her hands, her eyes darting wildly, while Eric muttered under his breath about betrayal. Michael raised his voice above the noise. "Please sit down. This document is legally binding. Mr. Carter's capacity was evaluated 3 separate times by medical professionals. His wishes are clear." The outcry continued, accusations flying like arrows. She manipulated him. She brainwashed him. She was never around. I sat frozen, my pulse racing, trying to process the reality. Everything. Grandpa had left everything to me. Michael waited until the voices subsided, then continued. "Miss Carter also established a conditional trust of $5 million. These funds are to be distributed among family members who meet specific criteria." A hush fell again, hope flickering across their faces. He read slowly, letting each word land. "Eligibility will be determined based on prior treatment of Madeline Carter and ongoing conduct following this will reading. Detailed records have been kept of family interactions, correspondence, and behavior. Additional documentation was provided by Westlake Investigations." Gasps spread through the room. My father's jaw dropped, my aunt's face drained of color. Michael continued calmly. "At this time, based on the records, no family members present have qualified for distribution." The silence that followed was thick and suffocating. Then the shouting began again, louder than before. My father accused Michael of fraud. My aunt claimed the investigators were biased. Claire burst into tears, wailing that she had always loved Grandpa. Through it all, Michael remained steady, holding up documents when challenged, citing dates and entries from Grandpa's meticulous notes. He recounted incidents where I had been denied visits, where my name had been mocked, where my parents had told staff to keep me away. Each detail landed like a hammer, undeniable. I sat still, hands clenched in my lap, my mind spinning. Grandpa had not only trusted me, he had fought for me even after he was gone. When the shouting finally dulled, Michael spoke once more. These terms are final. The estate belongs to Madeline Carter. The conditional trust will remain available for 1 year contingent upon conduct. His gaze swept the room, firm and unyielding. This is the last will and testament of Richard Carter. The room fell quiet, the only sound the faint rustle of papers as Michael gathered them back into his briefcase. My relatives sat stiff, their faces a mix of shock, anger, and disbelief. I stayed in my chair, my heart still pounding, trying to breathe through the storm I knew had only just begun. My father was the first to break the silence, his voice loud enough to rattle the chandelier above. This is absurd. She must have pressured him. He was confused. My mother's face twisted with fury as she jabbed her finger toward me. You were never there, Maddie. Not really. You swooped in when he was weak and vulnerable. I forced myself to sit taller, even as my hands shook in my lap. That is not true. I was with him every week for years. You would know that if you had cared enough to show up. Claire's sobs filled the room. She clutched at my aunt's sleeve, wailing about betrayal. Eric slammed his fist on the arm of his chair, his voice sharp. You think you are better than us now. You think you deserve everything. The words stung, but what cut deeper was the look of cold calculation in my father's eyes. He was already thinking about the next move, how to twist the story to his advantage. My aunt leaned close to my mother, whispering furiously, her knuckles white around a handkerchief. Michael Harris cleared his throat, his calm voice breaking through the chaos. I remind you the will is legally binding. Mr. Carter anticipated these accusations and had his competency verified on 3 separate occasions. Contesting this will would be costly and, in my professional opinion, futile. My father snapped back. We will see about that. I know plenty of lawyers. My mother muttered agreement, her eyes narrowing as she stared at me as though I had personally stolen something from her. I wanted to scream, to hurl the years of pain and dismissal back at them, but instead I held my ground. I looked around at the faces of the people who shared my blood, yet treated me as an intruder. My voice came out low but steady. I never asked for this. Grandpa made his choice. And you can hate me for it, but it will not change the truth. For a moment the room quieted, and in that silence I could feel the shift. They realized they could not undo his decision. Their power had slipped, and they hated me for being the one left standing in the center. After the reading ended, relatives avoided my gaze as they filed out, murmuring to each other in hushed tones. My father stayed behind, his jaw set. He stepped close, his words clipped. You may have his money, but you will never have this family. He turned on his heel before I could respond, my mother following close behind. Claire brushed past me without looking, her perfume lingering in the air like smoke after a fire. Eric stopped just long enough to glare at me. Enjoy it while you can, he said, his voice bitter. Then he was gone. I sank back into the chair, the weight of everything pressing down. The estate, the trust, the anger of a family that had never truly accepted me. I thought of Grandpa's notebook, the entries where he had documented moments like this, proof that he had known exactly how they would react. Michael approached, his expression softer, now that the crowd had dispersed. He placed a hand on the back of the chair beside me. Are you all right? I nodded, though my voice trembled when I answered. I knew they would be angry. I just did not realize how much. He gave a faint smile. Anger often comes when people lose what they believe is theirs by entitlement. Your grandfather was very clear, Maddie. He trusted you. I held on to those words like a lifeline. As I left the house, the late afternoon light cast long shadows across the driveway. My breath rose in white clouds as I walked to my car, every step heavy, with the knowledge that life as I had known it was gone. In the quiet of the car, I let myself cry, the sobs shaking me until my chest hurt. Not just from grief for Grandpa, but from the sheer exhaustion of carrying his legacy against the weight of my family's hatred. By the time I pulled onto the road back to Denver, my tears had dried, leaving behind a raw resolve. Grandpa had prepared me for this storm. He had given me the truth, the evidence, and his unwavering belief. Whatever came next, I knew one thing with certainty. I could not go back to being the quiet, overlooked daughter. That part of me had been buried with him. From now on, I would have to fight not just to honor him, but to protect myself from the family who would do anything to see me fall. The following week, Michael Harris called me into his office in downtown Denver. His desk was neat, the shelves behind him lined with heavy legal books, but what caught my attention was the thick folder already waiting for me. He gestured for me to sit, his expression calm yet serious. "There is one more piece of your grandfather's will we need to discuss," he said. I leaned forward, bracing myself. Michael opened the folder and slid a page across the desk. It was written in Grandpa's hand, notarized and stamped. "He left a conditional trust of $5 million to the rest of your family," Michael explained, "but the funds are tied to a requirement. Each beneficiary must complete 500 hours of verified volunteer service with organizations your grandfather supported." I blinked, stunned. "Volunteer service?" Michael nodded. "Your grandfather wanted them to understand the values you live by. He knew money alone would not teach them anything." A small laugh escaped me, half disbelief, half relief. "They will never agree to this." Michael folded his hands. "That is their choice. If they complete the hours within 1 year, they receive their share. If not, the trust reverts back to the foundation he has asked you to oversee." I sat back in the chair, the weight of the words sinking in. For once, Grandpa had given me more than just protection. He had given me the power to make them face what they had mocked me for all my life. That weekend, I called a family meeting at the estate. They arrived with stiff smiles and tense postures, their eyes sharp with suspicion. My father refused to sit pacing near the fireplace, while my mother perched on the edge of a chair, her arms folded. Claire scrolled through her phone until Eric nudged her. I cleared my throat, my voice steady, though my heart pounded. "There is a condition attached to the trust Grandpa left you. 500 hours of community service at approved nonprofits. It must be completed within a year." The reaction was immediate. Claire dropped her phone with a loud clatter, her face twisted. "That is insane. I have a career. I do not have time to babysit at some soup kitchen." Eric laughed harshly. "Who is going to track this, you?" Michael, who had accompanied me, spoke firmly. "The hours must be verified by the organizations themselves and submitted to the executor's office. Without verification, no funds will be released." My mother's voice cut in sharp as glass. "This is just another way to humiliate us. To force us into your world of handouts and charity." My father slammed his fist on the mantel. He wanted us to build on his legacy, not waste our time sweeping floors. I felt the heat rise in my chest, but I refused to let my voice shake. He wanted you to understand what real gratitude looks like. 500 hours is less than 10 a week. If you cared about his wishes, you would do it. The room erupted with protests. Claire shouted that her marketing job was more important than cleaning up after strangers. Eric sneered that he would rather walk away than demean himself. My parents exchanged a look, the same look they had shared my whole life, united in their disdain for me. Michael remained calm, answering each objection with quiet authority. "These are the terms of the will. You may accept them or decline. But they are not negotiable." When the shouting died down, I looked around at their faces, searching for even a flicker of willingness. I saw only anger, pride, and fear. My aunt finally spoke, her voice trembling with outrage. "He was manipulated. He never would have written this." Michael opened the folder and held up the notarized page. "He wrote it himself. He signed it. And it is binding." The silence that followed was thick, broken only by the crackle of the fire. For the first time I saw doubt in their eyes, not doubt in the will but doubt in themselves. They knew they could never bring themselves to do what he asked. I ended the meeting, my voice quiet but clear. The choice is yours. You have 1 year. As they filed out muttering under their breath, I caught my mother's gaze. For a moment her eyes softened, something almost like regret flickering before she turned away. That night I walked through the empty halls of the estate, the air heavy with echoes of arguments and broken bonds. Yet in the silence I also felt something stronger. Grandpa's voice steady and calm, reminding me that gratitude was not measured by obedience or wealth, but by the way we lived. I stood in the study, looking at his old chair by the window, and realized he had given me more than an inheritance. He had given me the chance to hold a mirror up to the family that had tried so hard to erase me, and whether they faced their reflection or turned away, it would no longer be my burden to carry. It did not take long for the threats to begin. Within 2 weeks of the family meeting, I received a formal notice from an attorney representing my father and mother. They claimed the will was invalid, that Grandpa had been manipulated, that I had exerted undue influence. Reading those words felt like being slapped, though deep down I had known it was coming. Michael reassured me when I brought the letter to his office. They will try everything, he said, but your grandfather prepared for this. He showed me the file of medical evaluations and notarized statements Grandpa had arranged. It was ironclad. Still, the thought of facing my own parents in court made my stomach churn. The first hearing was held in late January at the Boulder County Courthouse. Snow fell heavy that morning, blanketing the steps in white. I walked up with Michael at my side, my hands trembling inside my gloves. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with whispers as my parents Claire and Eric sat at the plaintiff's table, their lawyers speaking with brisk confidence. When the judge entered the room quieted, my father's attorney launched into his argument, painting me as a schemer who had isolated Grandpa in his final years. He spoke of influence, manipulation, and betrayal. Each word felt like a knife. My mother sat stiff, her eyes fixed on the judge, while Claire dabbed at imaginary tears. Michael stood calmly when it was his turn. He presented the medical evaluations, each signed by doctors, attesting to Grandpa's sound mind. He read passages from Grandpa's notes that documented how my family had limited my visits. He displayed copies of emails, including one where my father instructed staff to deny me entry. The courtroom shifted as the evidence mounted, the narrative unraveling piece by piece. When the judge adjourned for the day, my father's face was red with anger. He leaned close as we passed in the aisle. "This is not over, Maddie." I met his glare, my voice low but steady. "It already." Island. The legal battle dragged on for weeks. Each filing brought new accusations, each hearing a chance for them to twist the story. But every time Michael countered with the documents Grandpa had prepared, his foresight became my shield. Outside the courtroom, the strain weighed heavily on me. Nights in my apartment stretched long and sleepless. I replayed their words over and over, the betrayal cutting deeper than any legal argument. They were not just fighting for money. They were fighting to erase me, to strip away the truth Grandpa had entrusted to me. In the middle of it all, I found an unexpected ally. My cousin Rachel, who had kept her distance during the earlier chaos, called me one evening. Her voice was hesitant. "I know you probably do not trust me, but I wanted to say I am sorry. I asked why now after everything." She admitted she had been afraid that speaking against the family had always felt impossible. But seeing the evidence in court had shaken her. "Grandpa was right about you," she said. "If you ever need me to testify, I will." Her words gave me a flicker of hope. Maybe not everyone in the family was lost. By March, the judge delivered the ruling. The will was valid, the trust enforceable, and the estate remained mine. My parents' petition was dismissed. I sat in the courtroom, hands clenched together as the gavel came down. Relief washed over me, though it was tinged with sorrow. Winning did not heal the fracture. It only made the distance permanent. My father stormed out without a glance. My mother followed, her eyes wet, but her mouth pressed into a thin line. Claire whispered something to Eric as they left, both of them glaring at me, as though I had committed a crime. Michael touched my shoulder gently. "It is finished. You are free to move forward now." I nodded, though the word free felt complicated. I had defended Grandpa's wishes, but in doing so, I had lost whatever fragile connection remained with the rest of my family. That night I sat alone in the study at the estate, the fire crackling softly. Grandpa's chair sat empty beside me, his notebook open on the desk. I traced the words he had written months before. "Do not let them erase you. You are my legacy." Tears blurred my vision, but I did not wipe them away. For the first time, I understood what he had meant. This fight had never been just about inheritance. It had been about voice, about dignity, about not allowing their cruelty to define me. And though the battle had cost me more than I ever imagined, I knew he would have been proud. Spring came slowly to Colorado that year, the snow melting into streams that ran through the foothills, the trees budding with shy green leaves. I spent more time at the estate than in my Denver apartment, the house no longer echoing with arguments but filled with quiet. It felt strange at first walking through those wide halls without bracing myself for sharp words or cold stares. The silence became a comfort, a reminder that it was finally mine to shape. With Michael's guidance, I began the work of honoring Grandpa's legacy. We set up the Carter Foundation, channeling much of the estate into nonprofits that mirrored his values. Scholarships for first-generation college students, housing for youth aging out of foster care, literacy programs for immigrant families. Each new partnership carried a piece of him forward, and each letter of thanks that arrived reminded me that his trust had not been misplaced. At the first board meeting, I sat at the head of the long mahogany table where Grandpa once reviewed contracts. My hands trembled as I spoke, but the faces around me were not family waiting to tear me down. They were community leaders, teachers, and advocates who wanted to build something real. For the first time in my life, I felt not small but steady, as though I finally belonged in my own skin. Not everyone disappeared. My cousin Rachel kept her word, volunteering at a youth arts program every Saturday. She called me once after a long day of painting murals with teenagers and said she finally understood what Grandpa had been trying to teach all of us. I smiled through tears, grateful that at least one thread of family connection remained unbroken. My mother surprised me too. A few months after the court ruling, she appeared at my door in Denver. She looked smaller somehow, her voice softer as she admitted she had begun volunteering at a literacy center. "I know it will not undo the past," she said, "but it feels like something I should do." We sat together for hours, sipping tea, not erasing the years of silence, but beginning to bridge them. The others stayed distant. My father cut off contact entirely, his pride too wounded to bend. Claire posted endless photos of her glamorous life, pretending as if none of this had happened. Eric moved out of state, chasing new deals. Their absence no longer pierced me the way it once had. Some doors were not meant to reopen. The estate itself transformed under my care. The cold sitting rooms became spaces for community gatherings. The gardens opened once a month to local schools' children running through the paths Grandpa had once tended so carefully. The garage where his old suitcase had waited for me became a workshop for young entrepreneurs. Every corner carried echoes of him, not in the furniture or the portraits, but in the purpose that now filled the air. On the anniversary of his passing, I hosted a dinner at the estate. The dining room that once held icy family meals was alive with conversation. Volunteers, students, and neighbors filled the long table, laughter mingling with the clinking of glasses. I stood at the end, looking out at the faces illuminated by candlelight. For the first time, I saw the house as Grandpa must have wished it to be, not a monument to wealth, but a living place of connection. After the guests left, I walked alone through the garden. The stars spread wide above me, the cool night, carrying the scent of blooming lilacs. I thought of all the battles, the courtrooms, the accusations, and the pain. I thought of Grandpa's steady hand on mine, telling me not to let them erase me. The ache of missing him would never fade, but it no longer hollowed me. It had become part of me, shaping the woman I had finally allowed myself to become. I stopped at the oak tree where he once sat beside me when I was 17, telling me gratitude was not obedience, but how we treated people. I whispered into the night, "I kept my promise, Grandpa." And in the stillness, I felt as though he was there, proud and at peace. Life had taken more from me than I expected, but it had also given me something greater. A chance to redefine what family meant to build it not from blood, but from shared purpose and care. I had carried his legacy forward, and in doing so, I had found my own. If you have followed this story to the end, I hope it has touched something in you. Tell me in the comments where you are watching from, and what part of this journey resonated with you. Do not forget to like and subscribe if you want more stories like this one. Your support helps keep these voices alive, and I cannot wait to share the next chapter with you.